Remove it, or we'll fine you daily until it's gone. That's what HOA President Colleen Durrett said the morning after the blackout, the one where HOA Karen cut the power, while my wife was on a ventilator. She stood on the edge of my mulch border like she owned the deed to my oxygen. That's not just a box, Colleen, I said, voice steady. That's emergency power to a ventilator. You cut it and you cut air. She didn't blink. The exemption lapsed. You failed to refile in Q2. The board has full enforcement rights. I designed the emergency power system at County Medical. I don't need your permission to keep my wife alive, and I've recorded every second of this. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. Her expression tightened. She hadn't expected that. My name's Marcus DeWitt, I continued. I'm not just Lena's husband. I'm a licensed electrical engineer, certified inspector, and city consultant. And that generator enclosure, I built it to code, filed the exemption under your signature, and designed it to look like a garden fixture because I respect this community more than you do. Behind me, the vines curled around the trellis lid like they were shielding the heart of my house. That enclosure wasn't decoration. It was a quiet machine that hummed when the world failed. It kept the one person I couldn't lose breathing through Florida thunderstorms and grid failures. It was life support, disguised as landscaping. Lena came home from the hospital 18 months ago. She couldn't walk without help, couldn't sleep without pressure support. Her diaphragm muscles had begun to degrade faster than her doctors predicted. We installed the ventilator in her bedroom, the monitors on her chair rail, and the backup system out in the garden because she hated the way machines looked inside. That generator wasn't a luxury. It was peace of mind. It was the reason I could close my eyes at night. The night before Colleen showed up with her fine threats, I had been in the garage, my converted office, checking voltage logs when the hum disappeared, lights off, then silence. No warning, just a gap, a pause, then a beep. I bolted up the stairs to Lena's room. The emergency battery had kicked in, but her breathing pattern was already showing signs of strain. Shorter inhales, shallower volumes. That's when I knew this wasn't random. The grid was stable. My breakers were intact. But my outdoor cameras, offline. Someone had tampered directly with the enclosure, and the HOA had a copy of the lock key. For routine inspections, I didn't sleep that night. I sat beside her until morning, tracking every breath, staring at a green LED blinking like a metronome for survival. And then came Colleen. On cue, clipboard in hand, smugness in her voice. We're issuing a removal order, she said. It doesn't comply with front yard visual uniformity. You'd rather risk a death than see an enclosure you signed off on? Her mouth tightened. The board has rules, Mr. DeWitt. I could have exploded, but I didn't. I stepped back and looked at her like I would at a wire shorted through a flooded wall. Dangerous, arrogant, and begging for consequences. When she walked off, I texted Byron, my brother, a sitting judge in district court. I told him about the outage, the lockbox, and the violation notice. His reply was immediate. Document everything. I'm watching. Don't escalate. We'll do this right. So I did. I replaced the tampered hardware. I concealed new cameras in the trellis vines. I rerouted power through a surge-protected double loop, so any unauthorized access would be obvious in the logs. I logged every volt, every inspection, every interaction. Because I wasn't just protecting Lena's breath, I was protecting the promise I made the day she came home from the ICU, that as long as I drew breath, she would too. This wasn't going to be a negotiation. It was going to be a reckoning. Where are you watching from? The worst part about HOA abuse isn't the fine. It's the slow erosion of dignity. The way they wrap threats in polite language, how they make cruelty look like protocol. And at Briar Glen Estates, it wasn't just me. They'd done this before. After Colleen walked away from my yard, I went back inside, pulled up the incident logs, and double-checked timestamps. The outage occurred at exactly 10:14 p.m. Power resumed at 10:17. That meant someone cut the feed. Not a surge, not a brownout. A manual interruption. I opened the local camera logs. Everything went dark at 10:13:42. Not just the enclosure feed, but the side fence cam too. 1 minute later, the house lost power. My system tried to ping the outdoor cams. Nothing came back. That wasn't nature. That was someone pulling a line. But to Colleen and her board, it was just another code compliance correction. I pulled out the HOA handbook again. Page 46, subsection G. Medical exemptions must be reviewed annually and refiled no later than 30 days prior to expiration. I had submitted my renewal 45 days in advance. I had the email and their confirmation. They never denied it. They just ignored it. I spent the next morning walking the neighborhood. I wasn't just looking for answers. I was looking for patterns. On Azalea Circle, I found them. A ramp, low profile, wood trimmed, barely noticeable, had yellow caution tape stretched across it. A sign on the porch window read, "Pending modification approval." I knocked. A woman in her 60s opened the door, looking exhausted. "I'm Marcus from Willow Bend," I said. "I think the HOA's been targeting medical exemptions. Did they block your accessibility ramp?" She blinked, then nodded. "They said the wood stain didn't match the porch trim," she said. "We had to remove the handrails last week or face a daily penalty." "Did you file an exemption?" "Twice. My husband's recovering from spine surgery. They told us it was approved, then revoked it in a closed meeting. I looked at the ramp. It wasn't just compliant. It was tasteful, integrated, safe." Back on Sycamore Court, I found another case. A family had installed a narrow mechanical chairlift on the outside steps of their split-level home. It had been removed 3 months ago. The father, I was told, had suffered a stroke. The HOA cited visible mechanical obstructions as grounds for enforcement. That made 3 of us in less than 24 hours. Colleen wasn't just targeting me. She was pruning the neighborhood for aesthetics, regardless of who got hurt. I returned home and updated my timeline. Not just my logs, but theirs. Every case, every ignored exemption, every medical modification, pending approval that mysteriously never cleared. Colleen called it harmony. I called it a pattern of discrimination. That evening, I opened my inspection software and simulated the enclosure's power trip event from the night before. The logs didn't lie. The failure signature matched a direct manual disconnect, not a system error. The trip occurred inside the circuit box, just behind the HOA accessible panel. The more I investigated, the clearer it became. They were abusing access. I didn't trust the board to review my case honestly. I didn't trust their appeals process either. What I needed now was leverage, something they couldn't suppress, something beyond them. I had the start of it. If I could prove they authorized electrical tampering without a licensed contractor, then the HOA wasn't just wrong. They were in violation of state code. I paced the room, scrolling through emails, checking every digital signature. That's when I remembered a detail from the last community newsletter. Colleen had publicly thanked a landscaping vendor named Danforth Maintenance for electrical coordination during the spring upgrades. I checked the Florida contractor registry. Danforth wasn't licensed for electrical work, which meant that any circuit work they did, especially on my property's grid interface, wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. That night, I sat in the garden. Lena slept inside, unaware of the war I was waging in silence. The generator hummed softly. I ran my hand across the trellis. The vines were starting to flower again. A few feet away, one of my hidden cameras blinked green. The HOA wasn't going to stop until someone stopped them. And now, I had a pattern. I had victims. And I had a contractor name tied to unauthorized access. I just needed someone in authority to listen. Terrence Malloy never looked comfortable in a tie. I spotted him outside the HOA office the next morning, fumbling with his collar as he unlocked the side gate for a utility vendor. He flinched when he saw me, like I'd caught him, sneaking out of a confession booth. "Morning," I said, stepping onto the path. "Didn't expect to see board members doing manual labor." He laughed, short and awkward. "Colleen likes things on a tight schedule. Less outsourcing these days." His voice always carried a layer of apology, like he owed the world a debt he could never repay. Treasurer for the HOA, but never the enforcer. Always trailing 2 steps behind Colleen, clipboard in hand, eyes downcast. "I wanted to ask about the generator notice," I said. "You signed off on the exemption last year, remember?" He nodded slowly, mouth tightening. "Then why the sudden reversal?" He glanced at the building's tinted glass door, then back at me. His hand rested on the key loop at his belt, fingers twitching like he wanted to unlock something but didn't know how. "I'm not supposed to talk about board votes outside session," he said. "Was there a vote?" His jaw twitched. "Terrence, my wife was on a ventilator when someone tampered with the backup system. I don't need you to break a rule. I need you to tell me if one was ever followed." He shifted his weight, 1 foot back, shoulders hunched slightly, his body fighting his conscience in real time. A man stuck between silence and decency. "There wasn't a vote," he murmured. "Colleen said it didn't require one." My chest tightened. "You all revoked a medical exemption without procedure?" "I didn't revoke anything," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "I just signed the budget sheets. I'm not— Look, Marcus, I didn't even know she was on a ventilator." He did, though. They all did. Lena's condition wasn't new, and the exemption was submitted with supporting documents. His guilt wasn't about knowledge. It was about complicity. "She nearly coded when the power dropped," I said. 3 minutes of battery before full respiratory failure. His mouth opened, then closed. His gaze dropped to the gravel beneath his shoes. "I didn't authorize anything," he said, quieter now. "I just kept my head down." That was the worst of it. Not Colleen's cruelty, but Terrence's silence. The silence of someone who should have said something when it counted. "She could have died," I said. "I know," he whispered. We stood there for a long moment. Traffic hummed beyond the gate. The vendor returned to his truck without a word. Terrence sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She had that maintenance team sweep the enclosures last week. Said some were improperly grounded. She didn't tell the board she'd cut your feed." I stepped closer. "Did she file a work order?" "No, it was verbal and the contractor." "Danforth Maintenance?" He nodded. "Same guys from the spring project." "They're not licensed for electrical work, Terrence. They had no right opening any box on private property." His eyes widened. "Wait, you're serious?" "I checked the registry myself. If she sent them in to tamper with circuits, it's a state code violation. Probably more." He ran a hand down his face. "I just thought it was another stupid aesthetic thing. I didn't realize—" "Now you do." He didn't respond, but his posture shifted, just slightly, shoulders straighter, less like a man hiding from truth, and more like one facing the weight of it. I didn't need him to be a hero. I just needed him to stop pretending not to see. Before I walked away, he called after me. "If someone were to submit a statement about what wasn't authorized, who would they send it to? City Code Enforcement, State Electrical Licensing Board, depends on how honest they want to be." He nodded, then looked away. But the crack was there, a fracture in the wall Colleen built, and that was all I needed. When I got home, Lena was awake, reading by the window. The machine beside her chirped in rhythm, quiet and constant. "I'm getting tired of this house," she said softly without looking up. "We're going to fix that," I told her. I didn't just mean the walls, I meant everything behind them. By Monday morning, the notice on my door had changed from violation warning to final enforcement. It was printed in bold red letters, tacked to the mailbox with a plastic seal, like a foreclosure. They'd move fast, too fast. No hearing, no appeal window, just a new deadline. 72 hours to dismantle the generator enclosure or face a $250 a day fine. Colleen wasn't just flexing authority. She was daring me to push back. I took the notice inside, placed it on the kitchen counter, and stared at it while the coffee brewed. The paper felt thicker than usual. Expensive stock. Like they wanted their threat to feel heavier in the hand. Lena shuffled in a few minutes later, wrapped in her robe, IV line slung over her shoulder like a sash. She gave me a soft look, the kind she used when she could sense the tension before the words ever came out. "They escalated it," I said. She didn't need to ask what. Her eyes flicked to the paper and then back to me. "You're not taking it down." "No," I said, "I'm not." And I meant it. But I also knew what escalation meant in this neighborhood. It meant Colleen was preparing to justify whatever came next. If I resisted removal, she'd use the non-compliance to frame me as a threat. And once the HOA labels you combative, they start documenting every step you take. It becomes less about enforcement and more about character assassination. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the neighborhood portal. Sure enough, a new agenda item had been added to the upcoming board meeting. Community Aesthetic Enforcement and Revisions, Emergency Clause Proposal. Emergency Clause. That told me everything. She wasn't just targeting me. She was trying to rewrite the rules after the punishment started. That's how HOA tyrants work. Retroactive enforcement, framed as urgent community alignment. I drove to the city planning office around noon, not as a homeowner, but as a certified inspector. I asked to review recent permitting requests submitted by Briar Glen's HOA. The clerk gave me access to the digital log. There were no active permits filed for electrical inspections or infrastructure access within the past 90 days. That meant Danforth Maintenance had been working off-book. No inspections, no approvals, no licensing. I jotted down every timestamp, every absence, every signature missing from the work logs. Then I filed a public records request to make those logs official. Colleen had created a paperless trail of illegal interference, and soon I'd make sure the right people saw it. As I left the building, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the motion sensor camera embedded in the trellis housing. I tapped it open. The live feed showed a man crouching beside the generator box. He wore a blue polo, Danforth Maintenance logo on the sleeve. I watched as he opened the enclosure's outer shell and reached for the conduit junction. No gloves, no tools, just his bare hands on wiring he clearly didn't understand. My chest tightened. I tapped the alert and triggered the pre-recorded voice warning. You are being recorded on a live feed monitored by law enforcement. Step away from the unit immediately. The man jerked back like he'd been electrocuted. He looked up, eyes scanning for the source of the voice, then stumbled to his feet and hurried out of frame. By the time I got home 20 minutes later, he was gone. But the camera had done its job. I pulled the footage, time-stamped it, and exported it to a secure drive. I included snapshots of the man's face, the unmarked van, and the tool-free tampering attempt. Colleen had now crossed into outright sabotage. With no permit, no notice, no safety protocol, they weren't just issuing violations anymore. They were tampering with life support equipment under the guise of neighborhood beautification. That night, I installed a secondary camera on the roofline. Not visible, not blinking, just watching. If they came again, they wouldn't just trigger a recording. They'd trigger a response. The next morning, I drove straight to the state electrical licensing board. I didn't take any chances, not an email, not a phone call. I walked in with a folder of printed evidence and video stills, ready to explain every frame, every timestamp, every wire configuration they'd need to see. I wasn't just angry, I was prepared. A woman named Tanya met me at the front desk, mid-50s, glasses on a chain, voice sharp from 1,000 hours of bureaucratic defense. What are we looking at? She asked, sliding the folder open. A homeowners association using unlicensed contractors to interfere with medical-grade residential power systems, I said. Caught on camera during an active exemption. Here's their notice. Here's their maintenance vendor, Danforth Maintenance. And here's the video feed of that vendor tampering with my backup enclosure. She flipped through the papers, pausing on the still shot of the man crouching at my generator box. This is a single-family residence? She asked. Correct. And the system? Hospital-grade ventilator backup, compliant with 2021 municipal code. I installed it myself. I'm a certified electrical safety inspector. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the next page. And the HOA authorized this contractor? Yes, without permit, without inspection, and in doing so, nearly caused a fatal event. Tanya stood up, walked to a nearby printer, and returned with a form. This is a formal request for investigation, she said, handing me a pen. Sign here, and I'll escalate it to the Division of Professional Regulation. This is serious, I signed it without hesitation. Someone from enforcement will contact you within 72 hours, she added. This may lead to temporary suspension of the contractor's operations. If they're unlicensed and made physical contact with residential circuits, that's a state-level code violation. She looked back down at the image of the man by my enclosure, and if your HOA authorized this, they'll be included in the report. That was what I came for. When I stepped back outside, the Florida sun hit me like a spotlight. But for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I was shrinking under it. I felt like it was following me. At home, I found Lena sitting by the window again. She had a quilt over her legs, the kind her sister made during the bad months. She looked up as I entered and gave me a look that asked without words, "Did you do it?" "They're launching an investigation," I said. Her shoulders dropped, not in defeat. Relief. "Will it be enough?" "It will be a start." I went to the garage, opened my main console, and began organizing all the evidence into one directory: logs, videos, past exemptions, photos, and neighbor testimony. I didn't need to convince the board anymore. I just needed to convince the state. As I sorted files, my eyes landed on something small. The spring newsletter from 3 months ago, still pinned to the corkboard above my desk. I hadn't looked at it since the day it came. In the corner of the second page was a note from Colleen. Special thanks to Danforth Maintenance for their support during community spring upgrades. Your hands-on work keeps Briar Glen beautiful. There it was again, her pride in that team, the one operating without license. I highlighted the text, scanned it, and added it to the evidence folder. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was damning. Colleen hadn't just hired them. She had celebrated them. Later that evening, I received an email from Tanya. Short, direct. Subject: enforcement notification. Case number 54218, 7-body, Mr. DeWitt. The division has officially assigned an investigator to your claim. You may be contacted for a formal statement. Please do not alter or delete any existing surveillance or documentation. Thank you for your cooperation. I leaned back in my chair, let the words sink in. This wasn't just a paper trail anymore. It was an active file, and for the first time, the state was watching. I didn't tell Lena about the investigator right away. Not because I was hiding it, because I needed her to have one more quiet day. One more afternoon without tension knotting her forehead or worry creeping into her pulse ox. The last few nights had been better, no power dips, no strange noises outside. But that kind of calm in Briar Glen never lasted. And sure enough, by sunset, the storm came back. Not the thunder kind, the clipboard kind. I was pulling weeds near the sidewalk when Colleen showed up again. She didn't knock, just stood there on the sidewalk, holding a new form like it was a royal decree. You've refused to comply with the final notice, she said flatly. The board has initiated enforcement. I rose slowly, brushing soil off my gloves. What does that mean exactly? She handed me the paper. I didn't take it. I just looked at her. It means we've authorized Danforth Maintenance to remove the enclosure within 24 hours. You're in violation. You forfeited your appeal rights. You never held a hearing. She shrugged. You declined to attend. I never received a date. Then maybe you should check your email more carefully. That's when I knew she was panicking. She'd skipped procedure and hoped I'd blink. Instead, I'd gone to the state board, and someone, somewhere, must have tipped her off that an investigation was underway. Because Colleen was no longer smug, she was desperate. You're making this worse for yourself, she said, and for your wife. My jaw clenched. Don't say her name. She stepped back half a pace, not fear, just recalculating. You're interfering with safety, I said. Tampering with exempt medical systems is a violation of Florida Building Code, Section 553. You know that? Her face twitched. I reported Danforth to the state licensing board. They opened a case file yesterday. Her hand tightened around the paper. And now, I said quietly, every attempt you make to enforce removal becomes obstruction. She didn't speak, not at first. Just turned slightly toward the sidewalk and said, You're not the only one who lives here, Mr. DeWitt. People care about how this neighborhood looks. Don't make yourself the villain. I stepped toward her, just once. You already did that. She walked away without another word. Inside, Lena was resting, a blanket over her knees and the soft rhythm of the machine beside her, lulling the room into a quiet hum. I checked the battery indicator. Full charge, backup intact. But I still re-ran the diagnostics, just in case. When I sat beside her, she opened her eyes. They came again? Colleen, I said. But she's running scared. She gave me a faint smile. Good. That night, I forwarded every piece of evidence to Byron. My brother didn't say much. He rarely did when he was working. But I saw the red receipts ping, one after another. Within the hour, he called me. She's exposed, he said. Between the contractor violations and lack of permit filings, she's looking at potential municipal penalties. You think it'll hold? It'll hold, he said. But the board will circle wagons. You need one of them to break ranks. I might have that. Then get the statement. I knew what he meant. Terrence. It had to be him. The next morning, I waited outside the HOA office until he showed up. He spotted me from across the parking lot and slowed his pace, hesitant. "You said you just signed budget sheets," I told him. "Now's your chance to sign something that matters." He looked around, nervous. "You know what'll happen if I go against Colleen? She'll lose her grip. That's the point. I've got 2 kids in this district, Marcus. I'm not looking to make enemies. I'm not asking you to take a side," I said. "Just to tell the truth." He hesitated, but something in his expression had changed. Less fear, more fatigue. He'd watched long enough. Now he had to decide if he was going to keep doing nothing while others got hurt. The 24-hour clock was ticking, and if Colleen really meant to enforce removal, then tomorrow someone would come with tools, and I'd be waiting. Terrence knocked on my door just after dark. Not the kind of knock you use when you're delivering a warning. It was quiet, 2 soft taps, the kind of sound a man makes when he's trying to do the right thing and hopes no one sees him doing it. I opened the door, and he stood there holding a folder against his chest like a life preserver. Sweat clung to his hairline, even though the evening breeze was cool. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside, but didn't sit. He looked around the room like it might be bugged, like HOA eyes were pressed against the windows. "No one followed you," I said gently. "I parked 2 blocks over," he muttered. "Walked the rest. Just in case." He set the folder down on my dining table and opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a printed copy of the board's vote logs, blank for the last 4 weeks. No vote to revoke any exemption. No record of a removal order. Just silence. "This should have been updated," he said. "Colleen said it was being handled under executive authority." "There's no such clause in the bylaws," I said. "I know. That's why I brought the second one." He slid the next document forward. It was an internal memo, unsigned but clearly written by Colleen. It referenced preemptive, aesthetic enforcement for non-conforming modifications, and instructed Danforth Maintenance to clear visual obstructions where exemption compliance has lapsed or is unverifiable. No vote. No authorization. "Just a memo," Terrence said. "I only saw it because I managed the vendor invoices." "And the third?" He hesitated. The final paper was a maintenance work log, dated 3 days before Lena's power was cut. It listed a visual obstruction removal at my address, marked completed. No contractor signature, just Colleen's initials. "I never signed off on this," Terrence said, "and neither did Sandra or Mike. She acted alone." I stared at the page. It felt like evidence in a criminal case. In a way, it was. "She put my wife's life at risk," I said, my voice low. He nodded. "I believe you." "Then why now?" He looked toward the hallway, where Lena's ventilator hummed quietly behind the closed bedroom door. "I saw her at the mailbox yesterday," he said, holding the rail like it was the only thing keeping her upright. And it hit me. We're not protecting a neighborhood. We're protecting an illusion. One woman's warped version of perfection. He pulled a USB drive from his pocket. I copied the HOA's maintenance request log. Danforth's been operating without electrical licensing for over a year. Every entry's in there. I took it without speaking. The weight of it, plastic and data, felt heavier than it should have. "What do you want in return?" I asked. "Nothing," he said. "But if this blows up, I was never here." "You'll be protected," I promised. "My brother's already involved. He's watching everything." Terrence gave a hollow laugh. "Of course he is. You always did have a backup plan." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "I wanted to speak up months ago, but I didn't know how to stand up to her. She controls the budget, the meetings, the narrative, and we all let her. She's not going to control what comes next," I said. He nodded once, then slipped out into the dark. I locked the door behind him and walked the folder back to my desk. Then I copied the USB files, scanned the memo, and backed everything up on an encrypted drive. I emailed the entire packet to Byron with the subject line, "Witness statement plus unlawful access logs." They attached. Lena was awake when I entered the bedroom. She looked up at me from her pillow, eyes tired but alert. "You're getting closer," she whispered. "Yeah," I said, sitting beside her. "We've got what we need." The camera feeds showed no movement outside that night, but I left the lights on anyway, because Terrence had finally spoken, and the truth had just entered the system. Byron called just after dawn. I reviewed everything, he said, no greeting. This isn't just negligence, Marcus. This is coordinated misconduct. The memo alone is enough to trigger a discovery. Order. I leaned against the kitchen counter, still holding my first cup of coffee. Will the licensing board move fast enough? They'll issue a freeze on Danforth's active contracts within the week, but Colleen's trying to stay ahead of it. She just filed for an emergency bylaw change, trying to retroactively legalize executive enforcement powers for the board president. She's rewriting the rules so she can break them. That's why we move first, he said. We present the state evidence directly to the city inspector's office. Code enforcement has jurisdiction over physical systems, not just permits. I glanced toward the backyard, where the enclosure sat beneath its trellis. The vines were thicker now, leaves opening in the morning sun like hands in prayer. Lena's safety depended on those wires staying untouched. You think they'll listen? I asked. They will when they see unlicensed work orders tied to a medical exemption. I didn't wait. By noon, I was downtown, sitting across from a city inspector named Wells, gray beard, square jaw, and a notepad that looked like it had survived 100 disputes. You're saying the HOA contracted illegal electrical work on a medically exempt residence? He asked, pen scratching steadily. I'm saying they did it without permit, without license, and without notice, I replied. And I have the video. I handed him the USB drive Terrence had given me, plus the memo, vote logs, and exemption documents. I spoke clearly, without emotion, just the facts. I knew people like Wells respected precision more than outrage. After 10 minutes of reviewing, he looked up. This memo, she admits to issuing verbal work orders without board approval. She called it aesthetic enforcement, on equipment attached to a ventilator circuit. His eyes narrowed. I'll open a case file today. If this checks out, we'll flag the HOA for violation of Municipal Code 412 and 425, unauthorized tampering and unsafe third-party work. He tapped the USB. You want this escalated to public safety or keep it internal for now? Internal until enforcement starts. He nodded. You'll get a notification within 48 hours. If we confirm, we'll issue a cease work order and notify every homeowner in the development. That was the moment I felt the balance shift. The moment I knew Colleen couldn't silence this. Not with meetings, not with rewritten rules, not with smug paperwork. Outside, the sun caught on the courthouse glass, throwing long shadows across the pavement. I texted Byron, city inspector reviewing, formal case opened, cease work pending. Then I drove straight to the hardware store. It wasn't enough to wait for the city. I needed to ensure no one got near the enclosure again before the order came down. I bought motion-triggered floodlights, a weatherproof equipment cage, and a small sign, white letters on black metal. Medically protected power system. Unauthorized access. Prohibited by law. Back home, I installed it all myself. The lights arched over the garden like sentries. The enclosure now sat behind a locking cage, not just disguised by vines, but shielded by steel. If they came back, they wouldn't do it in secret. They'd do it under floodlights, with cameras rolling and the law waiting. That night, I sat beside Lena as she slept, fingers curled around mine, breath steady beneath the low hum of the ventilator. I watched the camera feeds from my phone, every corner of the yard illuminated, silent, untouched. Colleen had pushed this too far, and now, for the first time, it wasn't just my word against hers. It was code. It was statute. It was state enforcement. She could bully neighbors, but she couldn't bully the law. The cease work notice arrived 42 hours later. Stamped with the city seal and issued under Municipal Code Enforcement Authority, it prohibited any further modification, inspection, or tampering with medically exempt electrical systems within Briar Glen Estates until a full safety audit could be conducted. And it was addressed not to me, but to the HOA directly. I printed 4 copies, laminated each one, and posted them in the most visible places I could: my front fence, the mailbox bulletin board, the HOA clubhouse gate, and directly beside the generator enclosure itself. I didn't care if it looked aggressive. I cared that no one could claim ignorance anymore. I also sent digital copies to Byron, the licensing board, and the neighborhood listserv. I wasn't trying to cause a stir. I was establishing record. Colleen had relied on silence for too long. Now, every word would leave a paper trail. That evening, I sat down with the surveillance logs. I reviewed every clip from the last 2 weeks. every motion alert, every unfamiliar car, every moment of unauthorized access. I cataloged each one and assigned them reference numbers. Danforth's first intrusion was now log 7A. The verbal confrontation with Colleen was 9C. The footage of their tech reaching into the panel without gloves, 11B. I labeled everything in a shared archive and gave Byron access. He called me the next morning. "You're running this like a litigation firm. Isn't that what you always told me to do when systems failed? Document everything?" "I meant backup batteries," he said dryly. "Not legal proceedings. Same principle. You plan for the surge before it hits." He went quiet for a second, then added, "You'll need someone to introduce the evidence at the meeting. She'll try to block me from speaking." "She can't block me." I sat back, absorbing that. "You're coming?" "She filed removal orders against medical equipment. That puts it within the realm of civil negligence. I have standing." It was Byron's way of saying he wasn't going to let me face this alone. I didn't say thank you. I didn't need to. He'd never needed it. The next step was to reinforce my position further. I printed my medical exemption approval, both the original and the resubmission. I attached the HOA's original confirmation email and highlighted the timestamp. Then I prepared a brief affidavit summarizing the events, the unauthorized access, the electrical violations, and the names of contractors used. All of it would go before the board in the upcoming meeting, and it would do more than clear my name. It would put Colleen under formal scrutiny in front of the entire community. The timing was perfect. The HOA's quarterly meeting was 3 days away, moved to the community center instead of the clubhouse due to anticipated attendance. Colleen thought the crowd would come to support her emergency bylaw motion. She didn't realize they'd be there to watch it unravel. The night before the meeting, I rehearsed my statement twice, kept it clean, factual, no anger, just evidence. Lena watched me from the sofa, her breathing steady beneath the rhythm of the ventilator. "You've done everything you can," she said softly. "Not yet," I told her. "But we're almost there." The garden lights flicked on outside as the sun fell. I stood at the window, watching the vines twist along the cage. They looked like they'd always been there now, part of the design, not a disruption. I thought about Terrence, about the woman with the ramp down on Azalea Circle, about every person in this neighborhood who'd kept quiet because they didn't think they had a right to fight back. This wasn't just about Lena anymore. It was about principle, about proving that safety doesn't need permission, that dignity can't be fined. Tomorrow, I'd walk into that meeting with more than just a complaint. I'd walk in with the weight of truth. And finally, Colleen wouldn't be able to hide behind protocol. I arrived 15 minutes early, but the community center parking lot was already full. The HOA had moved the meeting here, thinking it would give them space to control the room. But what they didn't plan for, what Colleen never imagined, was that the room would fill with more than her usual allies. I walked past clusters of neighbors talking in low voices. Some nodded at me, others didn't meet my eyes. But there were more of them here than I expected. Families, elderly couples. Even the woman from Azalea Circle with the ramp that had been ordered removed stood near the door with her husband beside her. Inside, the chairs were arranged in rigid rows. The board table was set on a low platform, like a stage. Colleen sat in the center, a crisp navy blazer over her shoulders and her hair pulled back tight, as if presentation could make policy. To her right sat Sandra and Mike, the other board members, silent, eyes down. And to her left, Terrence. He looked different, straighter in the shoulders, more still, like something had settled inside him. I took a seat near the front and waited. At exactly 6 p.m., Colleen tapped her gavel twice. "This meeting of the Briar Glen HOA Board is now in session. Our agenda tonight includes revisions to enforcement bylaws, architectural compliance votes, and public comment regarding recent utility system modifications." Her voice carried a clipped efficiency. A theater of order. She proceeded through the first agenda item, budget allocations, then enforcement updates, all mechanical. No mention of the storm brewing just a few feet away. Finally, she reached the third point. "Next, we will discuss item 3C, enforcement actions and proposed emergency powers for aesthetic compliance." She glanced up, eyes scanning the room. "Before we proceed, we'll open the floor for public comments limited to 3 minutes per resident." I stood, Colleen's mouth flattened. "State your name and address for the record." "Marcus DeWitt, 512 Willow Bend." The room was quiet. "I'm here tonight because the board, under Colleen Durrett's direction, authorized unauthorized access to my property. My wife's ventilator backup system was tampered with by a non-licensed contractor, in violation of municipal code." Colleen started to speak, but I held up a folder. "This is the cease work notice issued by the city. This is the licensing board's investigation confirmation. And this," I handed a printed memo to Terrence, who passed it silently down the line, "is a directive issued by President Durrett to begin enforcement without board vote, legal review, or proper permitting." Murmurs began to ripple through the room. I stepped back and turned slightly to face the seated residents. "My wife is medically exempt under the HOA's existing bylaws. I followed every process. I submitted all documentation. And still, she nearly lost her life because someone decided aesthetics were more important than safety." Colleen stood then, interrupting. "Mr. DeWitt, you are misrepresenting internal procedures." "No," a voice cut in. "Terrence." He stood slowly. All eyes turned to him. "The board did not vote to revoke Mr. DeWitt's exemption," he said, voice steady. "There was no official authorization for Danforth Maintenance to access his enclosure. That decision was made unilaterally." Colleen turned to him, eyes wide. "Terrence, I've submitted a full log of board communications, vendor invoices, and internal memos to city enforcement," he said, cutting her off. "And I've given my statement to the state licensing board." Gasps spread across the room. Colleen's face drained of color. Sandra and Mike said nothing. They looked like statues. For the first time, the silence that had once protected her now made her small. Byron stood from the second row. "I'm Judge Byron DeWitt," he said calmly. "And if any of you would like a printed copy of the cease work notice or the legal statute protecting medically exempt systems, I brought 50. He lifted a folder and set it on the table behind him. People surged toward it. Colleen tried to regain control. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular," Byron said without raising his voice, "is threatening the life of a vulnerable resident and violating state electrical code in the process." She had no answer for that. No gavel could drown out what had already been exposed, and nothing she said next would change the fact that the room no longer belonged to her. It was the silence that did her in. Not the confrontation, not the paperwork, not even the words "state investigation." It was the silence after Byron spoke, the weighted hush of a room full of neighbors realizing they'd trusted the wrong person. Colleen sat back down, trying to gather herself. She reached for the gavel again, but this time it was just a prop. No one flinched at the sound. Sandra finally spoke. "I motion to table the emergency bylaw proposal pending review by legal counsel." Colleen turned sharply to her. "We don't need to table anything. The motion is valid." "No," Mike said, voice low but firm. "It's not. And even if it were, this room doesn't support it." He looked at the crowd, then directly at me. "I second the motion to table," he said. Colleen opened her mouth again, but she didn't speak. Maybe she knew it was over. Maybe she was still calculating a way out. But nothing she could say would fix what had just happened. Not with Byron in the room. Not with the cease work order in Terrence's hands. Not with 50 printed violations being quietly read by her own neighbors in the back of the hall. Terrence leaned toward the mic. "For the record, I move that we open a formal review of all medical exemption cases from the last 2 years. With third-party oversight." Sandra nodded. "Agreed." Mike raised his hand. "I support." Colleen didn't vote. She didn't need to. The motion passed. The room exhaled. Behind me, someone started clapping, not loud, just a slow, tentative rhythm. But others joined in, 3, 4, then 10 hands in unison. Not for me, not for Byron, for themselves, for finally seeing the gears behind the curtain and realizing they could still turn them. Colleen pushed her chair back and stood. "We'll reconvene next quarter," she muttered, and walked off the platform without another word. Her heels clicked across the laminate floor, sharp and hollow. No one followed her. The meeting dissolved after that. Conversations turned personal. Neighbors approached me with soft apologies, hushed thanks. The woman from Azalea Circle gave me a folded note, her exemption paperwork, in case it helped others. I stepped outside into the cool night air. Byron walked beside me. "That was a clean break," he said. No shouting. No theatrics. You expected shouting? I expected a lawsuit, he said with a dry smile. But I'll take public reckoning over courtrooms any day. I spotted Terrence leaning against the far wall, his tie loosened, his face unreadable. I walked over, and for a long moment, we just stood there. You did it, I said. He shook his head. No, I just stopped pretending I couldn't see it. You didn't just step up, Terrence. You cracked the door wide open. He gave a tired laugh. I've already gotten 3 texts from Colleen. She still think you work for her? She always did. He looked out across the parking lot. You know, when I joined the board, I thought I could help keep things balanced. Bring some reason to it, but it got easier to let her steer, even when I didn't like where we were going. You've got a chance to steer now, I said. He nodded. If they let me, they will. We stood there in silence again, but this time it felt different, not heavy, just still. When I finally got home, Lena was still awake, sitting beneath the reading lamp, a book open in her lap. I sat beside her, leaned back, and exhaled for what felt like the first time all week. How'd it go? She asked. They listened, I said. More than that, they saw. She smiled, soft and real. Good. Then maybe we can sleep tonight. I looked out the window at the garden, the vines curled around the metal cage, moonlight catching the sign I'd posted, protected. That's what it said now. Not fined, not in violation, protected. Tomorrow, enforcement teams would begin reviewing the neighborhood's violations. Letters would go out. Permits would be examined. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, everything was quiet. And behind our walls, behind steel and code and fight, Lena breathed easy. The next morning, I found Colleen's resignation posted on the HOA website. 1 paragraph, no apology, no admission, just a formal statement that she was stepping down due to increased personal obligations and a desire to allow new leadership to guide Briar Glen forward. But it was done. She was out. By noon, the city's code enforcement team had begun their walkthroughs. A white city van pulled into the neighborhood, and 2 officials in navy jackets began inspecting electrical boxes and verifying past work. They moved slow, methodical, clipboards in hand, safety tags at the ready. One by one, the violations started disappearing. The caution tape on Azalea Circle was removed. The elderly couple with the removed ramp received written approval for immediate reinstatement. Even neighbors who had once whispered their loyalty to Colleen started asking questions, requesting clarity on their own properties. A shift was underway, and it moved deeper than the bylaws. I stood near my garden as the inspectors walked the perimeter. One paused by the enclosure, crouched low to check the conduit lines. He gave a low whistle. "Nice work," he said. "Who installed this?" "I did," he nodded. "You know what? You're doing. You'd be surprised how many HOA boards mess with things they don't understand. One shorted wire out here, and someone ends up in a hospital." "They almost did." The inspector looked up, brow furrowed. "Well, that won't happen again." He affixed a green tag to the base, verified, medical exemption, do not tamper, and moved on. I took a photo of the tag, not because I needed proof, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to be heard, to be protected by the same system that once tried to punish me. Lena was sitting in the sunroom when I came inside, light filtering through the blinds, her book open on her lap again. She looked up and smiled as I entered. "They verified it? They tagged it." She nodded slowly. "So, we're safe? For now. And after the next vote, hopefully for good." Later that week, the HOA board held a special election. The meeting was packed. Terrence stepped up as interim president, nervous at first, but steady as he laid out a revised medical exemption policy, one that required transparency, third-party review, and clear timelines. He wasn't polished, but he was honest, and that mattered more. When the final vote passed, I felt something shift in the room, not just policy, but posture. The neighborhood had seen what silence cost, and now they were learning how to speak. Terrence approached me afterward, offering a handshake that turned into something firmer, more grounded. "I didn't do this alone," he said. "No," I replied. "You just did it when it counted." In the weeks that followed, I stopped checking the camera feed every night. The floodlights stayed up, but mostly for show. No more notices, no more threats. Just quiet hums and a soft green LED that blinked reassurance into the dark. And Lena? She started spending more time outside, sitting on the garden bench, breathing real air, watching the vines grow across the enclosure like nothing had ever happened, but something had. We changed something, and we didn't do it through anger or noise, or by meeting power with more power. We did it by documenting, by speaking, by refusing to be quiet when someone else tried to decide how safe our home could be. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because this fight, it's bigger than one yard, one box, or one neighbor with too much authority. This fight is about dignity, and that's not something any HOA gets to vote on.